My name is Michael Harper, and if someone had told me that one morning I would wake up and by evening find myself in one of the most notorious prisons in the United States, I would have laughed. I've never broken the law. The most I've ever been charged with is speeding in my old Ford. But on the day it all happened, when they handcuffed me right outside my apartment building, when my neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains like it was a show, that's when I first felt how the world can fall apart in seconds. I woke up at 7:14 a.m. to the smell of burnt coffee. The old coffee pot had decided to explode again, spraying black liquid everywhere. I argued with it every morning but never bought a new one. Back then, it seemed to me that such trifles were what life was all about. I even cared about that broken coffee pot. Now I feel nostalgic for it, because it smelled like home, freedom, normality. I didn't know that in an hour I would be wrapped in another iron thing. Cold, dead like a trap, handcuffs. I was just putting on my jacket when I heard sirens. Not the loud ones that make your heart skip a beat, but quiet, short signals, the kind cars make when they arrive at a specific address. I looked out the window and saw 3 police cars. Honestly, the first thing I thought was, who broke something in Morris's house again? And then I heard, Michael Harper, come out of the house with your hands up, and something inside me snapped. It was as if someone had grabbed my heart and squeezed it so hard that my ribs cracked. At first, I thought they had made a mistake. It happens. One name for another. Couldn't be me. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. 4 officers stood in front of me, one of them holding a folder. Harper Michael? Said the tall, dark-haired man with tired eyes, emotionlessly. Yes, but you are under arrest on suspicion of bank robbery and involvement in the hijacking of an armed transport. Keep your hands visible. What? Are you out of your mind? They didn't let me finish. They grabbed me roughly, twisted my arms behind my back, and cold metal clamped around my wrists. It hurt so much that I instinctively clenched my teeth. I didn't do anything. I was trying to breathe. You're wrong. You have to check. I was at work. You'll figure it out in court, Harper, one of the cops muttered, not even contemptuously, just wearily, as if he didn't want to do it either. But he did. Damn bureaucracy, damn system. They took me to the police station. The room was empty, just a table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner. There was a sign on the wall, all interrogations are recorded for your safety. My safety. At that moment, I thought with bitter irony, whose protection are you recording this for? Mine or yours? 10 minutes later, Detective Grayson entered. He had gray hair at his temples, dark bags under his eyes, and a wrinkled suit, as if he had slept in it. He plopped down on a chair. Well, Harper, shall we begin? He opened the folder. I have some bad news for you. I've had enough of that already, I replied through clenched teeth. He looked at me, and there was no anger or sympathy in his gaze, only indifference. A witness recognized you. That's impossible. I was never near that bank. What about the cameras that recorded the physical description? The cameras don't see faces. And the build? I laughed. Half the country fits that description. Grayson sighed and slammed the folder shut. You need to understand, there is evidence. We found fingerprints in the abandoned car the criminal used to escape. Yours. I felt the air become heavier. It was as if the room had shrunk in size. That's impossible, I whispered. Someone framed me. They planted it. Grayson closed the folder. Prove it in court. I'm not a criminal. I slammed my fist on the table. "That's what they all say," he replied calmly. At that moment, I thought for the first time that the system would not let me escape. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days, and they decided that I was guilty of a crime punishable by 20 years in prison. The prosecutor had everything: witness who remembered my voice, cameras that showed a guy about my height, and worst of all, those damn fingerprints. My lawyer looked like he had just been woken up. "Mr. Harper, we can appeal," he whispered to me before the verdict. "It's still possible, but you saw for yourself that it's nonsense." I clenched my fists. "You understand that I'm not guilty. It doesn't matter," he whispered quietly. "What matters is what the jury sees." And I realized they had already written me off when the judge said, "Michael Harper is found guilty, sentence 20 years in Pennsylvania, State Prison East." I felt that the world had not just broken. It had shattered like glass under my feet. They led me down the hallway, and I heard behind me, "Poor guy. He must have been so good at pretending. But no, maybe he really is innocent." But the worst thing was hearing whispers about Eastern State Penitentiary. Several people even crossed themselves. "That's where," whispered one woman. "They say you can still hear it." Shoo! Her husband interrupted her. "Enough, but I've heard enough. Voices, footsteps, shadows." The bus used to transport prisoners reeked of gasoline, metal, and old sweat. Was riding in a cage in a separate section. Through the bars, I could see the other guys. One of them, a skinny, dark-haired guy with a tattoo on his neck, winked at me. "New here?" he croaked. "First time?" "First and last time," I replied. "Everyone says that. I was set up." He smiled crookedly. "That's what everyone says." After a pause, he added, "But sometimes it's fucking true." We drove for an hour. The cold emanated from the metal walls. The road was bumpy, and the bus jolted so much that my teeth chattered. Someone behind me whispered, "Eastern State." I heard that people whisper in the corridors at night. And I heard. My brother was there. He got out, and a month later, someone covered his mouth. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the bus had already stopped. In front of US stood not a building, not a block of flats, a monster, the Eastern State Penitentiary. Strong stone walls, towers, narrow slit windows, where guards with rifles once sat. The whole complex looked as if it had been created specifically for people to disappear in forever. One of the prisoners muttered quietly, "This isn't a prison, it's a tomb." I wanted to say that this was an exaggeration, but when the gates opened in front of us, I realized that it wasn't even a metaphor. The first step inside was like stepping into hell. The air was different, heavy, stale, the kind that had been saturated by centuries of screams, despair, and blood. They led me down the corridor. The walls were thick and rough, and you could feel the history of violence in them. Where there are now worn stones, there used to be solitary confinement cells, the legendary dark wells. Every step echoed loudly. "Knock, knock, knock." "Get used to it," muttered the guard with the thick neck. "Even your breathing echoes here." And here, I swallowed. "Are there really ghosts?" He stopped. He looked at me as if I had said something stupid. But there was something else in his eyes. Fear? No. More like weariness from knowing. "Ghosts?" He shrugged. "I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something here." I shuddered. There was a rustling sound ahead, and then I saw them for the first time. Shadows, They flashed between the windows, like shadows of people, but they had no shape, like smoke moving on its own. "Did you see that?" I exclaimed. The guard looked ahead, and his face turned pale as chalk. "Go," he said hoarsely. "Just go and don't look." Cell number 137. Soundproof. Small. Cracked ceiling. Stains on the floor. I didn't even want to think about what those stains were. The door slammed shut, and at that moment, I felt loneliness envelop me. The air was cold, as if someone had just been breathing in the cell, and then disappeared. I sat down on the bunk. It was as hard as concrete, and suddenly I heard, "Michael!" A quiet whisper, barely audible, as if someone was standing behind me. I turned around sharply. Empty. I pressed my palms to my face. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. Footsteps behind the door, then silence, and then something like nails scraping across the wall on the other side. Scratch, scratch, scratch. "Stop it!" I shouted. The wall responded with a rustle, as if something had run inside it. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, and then I heard a voice. "They already know you're here." I wasn't asleep. Every few minutes, something would crackle. Footsteps could be heard nearby, very quiet, almost timid. But the worst thing was the voices. "Here, we're here. Don't scream. You won't get out. You're ours." Sometimes they whispered right next to my ear. I felt cold breath on my neck, even though no one was there. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard someone walking down the hallway. I peeked through the small window in the door. The hallway was dark because the lights were turned off at night, but I could clearly see the shadow of a person. Slow, barely moving. "A guard?" I whispered. The shadow stopped, abruptly, and then turned around, but it had no head, just an empty, dark void. I screamed so loud that my voice broke. I crawled to the door, and I heard something scratching at the metal. But when the guard turned on the light, there was no one there. "What are you screaming about?" he yelled. "There was a shadow." Listen, he interrupted. "If you want to survive here, don't look into the darkness, and pray that the darkness doesn't look back." Then I realized for the first time, they had all been broken long ago. And so, would I? At breakfast, a skinny guy with red hair came up to me. "Are you new here?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Thomas, but you can call me Tommy." "Okay." Thomas leaned closer and whispered, "I don't want to be here." He whispered uncertainly, his eyes filled with trembling fear. "They come to me every night." "Who are they?" He looked around. "The shadows." I shuddered. "I had that too," I said. "They were looking at me." "They look at everyone," whispered Thomas. "But some they choose." "Choose for what?" Thomas swallowed, his lips turning white, "to take away." And he left, leaving me trembling all over. Something changed that night. The shadows no longer just passed by. They stopped. They watched. They beat on the walls. They whispered my name in hundreds of voices. "Michael, Michael." I covered my ears, but they didn't stop. On the contrary, they became louder, inside my head. Then my door creaked quietly. It was locked. The lock clicked, and the door slowly began to open. Backed up against the wall. The darkness behind the door was not just darkness. "Breathe. No. Close it," I shouted, but the guards did not come. And then I saw hands in the darkness, black, thin like fog. They reached out to me. I fell to the floor and closed my eyes. I pressed myself against the wall until I Heard the lock click again. I don't know when I fell asleep. Maybe for a few minutes. Maybe I lost consciousness. But in the morning, I saw a black mark on my wrist, as if my hand had been squeezed by someone who had long since ceased to have flesh. I sat on the bunk and thought only one thing. I'm going to die here, and they'll come for me. I didn't know then that the worst was yet to come, because what I saw were only the first hints of those who live in this cursed prison, and who don't let their guests leave even after death. I'll do part 2, but an important clarification. In your request, the bully wanted to put him down could mean an attempt to humiliate or subjugate him socially, but it could also have other meanings. I will not describe any sexual violence. I will present it as an attempt to humiliate the protagonist, intimidate him, and break him in front of others, which fits perfectly into the prison context and does not cross any boundaries. If someone had told me that after the first night, things would only get worse, I wouldn't have believed them, because how could it get any worse? But Eastern State seemed to laugh at my hopes. Here, every day was a step down into a bottomless darkness. The second day did not begin with breakfast. It began with a deafening knock on the door that woke me up. Please, not again. I managed to think before the door opened and a guard with a square jaw appeared. Get out. It's time to go outside. He spoke as if he didn't care whether I came out alive or not. I went out. I kept calm, even though inside I was crumbling. The Eastern State Courtyard is no place for a stroll. It's a concrete pit with high walls. The sky above looked like it was being viewed through a narrow hole. No one smiled. No one joked. Everyone moved cautiously, looking to see where everyone else was standing, who was sticking with who was the boss here. I stood aside, afraid to look at anyone unnecessarily, but I couldn't avoid one glance. He was standing by a concrete wall, tall, broad-shouldered, massive. His face was square like a bulldog's. His arms were like cannons. He had a chain tattoo on his neck. When I first looked at him, he was already looking at me. Newbie, he drawled, as if savoring the word. Lost. I looked away. I didn't want any trouble. I didn't want to attract attention. But he moved toward me. Thomas, who was standing nearby, whispered, "Don't answer him. Don't look him in the eye. Don't go near him. He's toxic." Who is he? I barely moved my lips. Everyone calls him Clay. Thomas lowered his voice. They say he once killed his cellmate for sneezing. At night, even the guards are afraid of him. Here, I felt a chill run through me. Clay stopped in front of me and boomed, "What are you new here? Think you can just stand here and breathe the same air as everyone else without asking permission?" And that's when I realized for the first time, he wants to make me a scapegoat, to put me below everyone else, to humiliate me so that I would never raise my head again. He mimicked my voice. "You hear that, guys? Our new kid thinks he's just here." Ah! A few prisoners laughed hoarsely, but most remained silent. Everyone knew Clay. No one wanted to get involved. "Listen," I gathered myself. "I just want to serve my time, and do you want to?" He interrupted and leaned so close that I could smell onions and blood from his mouth. "You don't want to. They want you here. Want you to show everyone who you are today." He pushed me in the chest. Barely stayed on my feet. "Don't," Thomas whispered. "Just walk away." But I couldn't walk away. Clay pushed me again, harder this time. I stepped back. "Oh, look, the new guy is dancing," he shouted. Laughter came from different corners of the courtyard. Something inside me snapped. Anger, despair, helplessness. It all came together. In one ball, I did what I should never have done. "Get off me," I said quietly. Clay stopped laughing. "What did you say?" I said. I swallowed my fear. "Get off me." There was silence for a second. Then Clay punched me in the stomach. The air was knocked out of my lungs.
I dobbeldover.
He grabbed me by the back of the neck and pinned me against the wall. My forehead hit the concrete hard. "You want to be tough? You want to show your teeth?" He growled. "I'll make an example of you for everyone." He pressed my face against the wall. "Go ahead. Tell me who's boss here." "Get off me," I whispered. He slammed my head against the wall so hard that sparks flew from my eyes. "Say it."
No.
And then I did something that shocked even me. Calmer ran up, and I elbowed him right in the nose. I heard a crunch. Clay roared, "Bitch!" And a storm broke out on me. He hit me in the jaw. I fell. He kicked me in the ribs. Someone was shouting for security. Someone was yelling, "Beat him!" Everything blurred into chaos. But I didn't let myself cover my face with my hands. I didn't curl up into a ball. I looked Clay straight in the eye, even when blood blurred my vision. And that made him even angrier. "I'll destroy you," he roared. But before he could swing again, something fired loudly. "Everyone down," roared the guard, firing his air rifle into the air. "Enough!" 3 guards dragged Clea away. They lifted me up by my arms. "Put him in solitary," said the captain. "Both of them, but the new guy in the cold one." Thomas turned pale.
No.
"Not there. He faltered under the guard's gaze. Didn't understand why he was so scared. I was about to find out. As I stood at the entrance, my hands were shaking. The guard who was leading me said quietly, "If I were you, I'd ask for any other punishment." "What is it?" I barely managed to say. He didn't answer. He just opened the door. The cold hit my face like I had walked into a freezer. "In here," he said, "and may God help you." I was pushed into the darkness. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Complete silence. Dark. So dark that I couldn't see my own hands. The temperature was like outside in the middle of winter. I wrapped my arms around myself and exhaled a cloud of steam. "Is anyone here?" I whispered, and silence answered me. "Yes." I shuddered. "Who's there?" I turned around, but saw nothing. The whisper was quiet but resonant. It was as if several voices were speaking at once. "It's cold here, isn't it? We know this cold. It took us all away." My heart began to pound so hard that I could hear it thumping in my ears. "Let go," I whispered. "Let go of me. Why, we were here long before you, and we'll be here after you." The darkness seemed to be approaching. I could feel it moving. It was as if it was flowing down the walls, as if it was breathing down my neck. "Who are you?" My jaw was trembling. Those who were locked up here forever. Those who were tortured by silence. Those who were frozen by fear. Those who never left this prison cell. The temperature dropped even lower. I could see my own breath even though it was completely dark around me. My hands were cramping up. I sat down on the floor but was startled. The floor was warm. Why was it warm? It should have been colder than a refrigerator, but the floor, it was pulsating, as if something was moving under it. "You will be with us too," a voice whispered in the darkness. I fell back and hit my shoulder against the wall. Something stirred there. It was as if the wall was alive. I began to breathe frantically. "Don't scream. It's too early. First, we will show you what they did to us." Suddenly, I was overcome by a terrible weakness. It was as if the cold was sucking the strength out of me. I fell to my knees, my hands shaking. In front of me, right in the darkness, a ray of light suddenly appeared, tiny, like a crack, and I saw an eye, a human eye, pressed against a crack that had appeared in the wall, blind, white, as if it had rotted away long ago. Then a second one opened up next to it, and a third, and a fourth. The whole cold cell was suddenly filled with eyes. Dozens, hundreds, lifeless, dead, but staring right at me. I don't remember what happened next. Someone was screaming. Maybe it was me. Maybe it wasn't me. My head was exploding with pain. I fell to the floor and lost consciousness. I woke up in the infirmary. My nose was swollen. My ribs hurt unbearably. My fingers were blue from the cold. The doctor, old and trembling, shook his head. You lived there longer than most. How long? 7 hours. I stared at him. 7? Seemed like a week. Time is different in a cold prison cell, he said quietly. There were them. The doctor paused for a moment. Then he whispered, I've been working here for 30 years, and no one has ever said, there's no one there. No one. He leaned closer. And if you want some advice, those eyes you saw, don't look back at them. Not even in your dreams. They don't like being looked at. I swallowed the lump in my throat. He added, now go. Today they'll take you back to your cell. But what? The doctor shuddered slightly. They rarely let go of those they've already touched. They took me back. The door to cell number 137 opened. Inside, it was colder than before, and there was a thin layer of frost on my pillow. I took a step forward and heard, whispering, we found you. You are ours now, and we haven't shown you the worst. Yet, I pressed my back against the wall. My life here was just beginning, and the shadows already knew my name. Below is Part 3, Complete Expanded Atmospheric. I am writing it, as long as possible in one message, without abbreviations, but within technical limitations. The style, plot, and atmosphere are all consistent with the previous parts and your requirements. First person, dialogue with dashes, creepy details, prison life, old man, thug, anxiety, the phrase, it wants to eat, and night hunting. Hashtag, Part 3, dash, continuation of the story, large volume, as close to 4,000 words as possible. I woke up because my hands were shaking, as if the cold of the punishment cell still lingered in them. It was as if the shadow I had seen there had frozen my blood, and every movement echoed in my body with a dull ache. When the cell door opened, I instinctively stepped back, thinking they were taking me back there, to that concrete icebox. But it was only Randolph, the guard, who always looked down on everyone as if we were not human beings but trash he was forced to guard. Get out, artist, he said and hit the bars with his baton. Breakfast. I walked out, trying not to look him in the eye. After solitary confinement, even, the fresh air seemed bitter and heavy. Other prisoners were already standing in the corridor, pale, sleepy, some with bruises, some with cuts. I noticed that many of them were stealing glances at me, or maybe I just thought so. After what happened with Gromolo in the shower, I had a bad reputation. The newbie who fought back. In prison, such a reputation is not always a good thing. We headed to the dining hall. Our footsteps echoed in the stone corridors of Eastern State, and with each echo, it seemed to me that I could hear someone else walking outside the walls, quiet, indistinct footsteps, as if someone was walking nearby but with a different kind of foot, somehow not human. I tried not to look back. The dining room resembled a forgotten factory workshop. Bare concrete walls, steel tables, the smell of wet metal and stale porridge. We went inside and immediately heard the clatter of plates, the clanging of cutlery, swearing, wheezing, laughter. Everything mixed together into one dirty mess. I took a tray. They dumped a yellowish mass on it, similar to semolina porridge, but with a smell more reminiscent of wet cardboard. I swallowed hard. An inner voice whispered to me, "Eat, otherwise you won't survive." I sat down at the table in the corner. That's where Grandpa always sat. He got his nickname not because he was very old, although he was clearly over 60. It was just that he had been here so long that no one even remembered his name. I didn't know it either. He sat quietly, hunched over, his prison jumpsuit hanging on him like a sack. His eyes were dark, cavernous, with a kind of subdued despair. And something else. I noticed it right away. There was memory in his gaze. A terrible memory to sit down, he muttered without looking up. Sat down. We ate in silence. I swallowed the porridge almost without chewing. It barely went down my throat. "Have you been here long?" I finally asked. The old man slowly turned his head toward me. "Longer than most people can bear. Can I ask about this prison?" I tried to speak quietly. "I've seen and heard some things. In solitary confinement, and..." He flinched nervously. "In solitary confinement?" He whispered. "How long were you there?" 3 days. He gasped sharply, as if I had said something crazy. 3 days. He muttered. "Many people don't come out of there quite themselves after a night there. And you..." He looked at me closely as if assessing me. "You're holding up. See?" I swallowed. "The shadow. And the voices." He pressed his fingers sharply to my lips. "Quiet!" I froze. He looked around, as if afraid that something would hear him. "Don't talk about them out loud. They're listening. They're always listening, especially to those who notice them." I leaned back a little. "Grandpa, I want to know the truth. What's going on here? Why does everyone say this is a cursed place?" He sighed and leaned closer. "Listen, stories have been around here for many years. Eastern State isn't just a prison. It's..." He glanced into the dark corner of the dining room. "Alive. Alive? Yes, and it feeds. In the past, it was the souls of those who were broken by solitary confinement. People went mad. They banged their heads against the walls. They tore themselves apart. And each death left something behind. An imprint, a stain. And the stains, they gather, they accumulate. This place hasn't been just a building for a long time. It's..." He paused, searching for the right word. "It's a reservoir of pain." A chill ran down my spine. "You're not the first one to be thrown in here for no reason," he added, quietly, "and you won't be the last." But he didn't have time to say more, because Gromola approached our table. His massive shadow covered us both. His fat fingers clenched into fists. There was a purple mark on his cheek from the punch I had given him. "Oh, look who's sitting here," he growled. "Our brave one." I tensed. "Not now. Not here." "Get lost," Grandpa said hoarsely. The thug laughed so loudly that several prisoners around us turned around. "What did you say, old runt?" Grandpa slowly raised his head, and in his eyes I saw something so cold that even Gromolo fell silent for a second. I said, "Back off." Gromola came closer and grabbed me by the collar. I'm not done with you yet, you bastard. You think you're a hero because you punched me in the shower? I told you what I would do. Let him go, Grandpa said again. What are you going to do to me? Gromola sneered. Grandpa raised his spoon. Just a spoon. Gromola laughed. You want to hit me with a spoon? And then something happened. A quick, sharp movement, so fast that I barely noticed it. The old man made a quick strike with the spoon at some point under Gromola's ribs, and he cried out, stepped back, clutching his side. What are you, bitch? He croaked out. Go, Grandpa repeated, or you'll stay here. The thug stared at him for a few seconds, breathing heavily, then spat on the floor. This isn't the... And he left. I exhaled as if I had been holding it in for 5 minutes. How did you do that? I whispered, son. He muttered, picking up his spoon again. I've been through things here. That would have made the big guys wet their pants. Don't worry, but you'd better stay away from him. He's not as dumb as he looks. I wanted to say something, but suddenly, a siren. Sharp, abrupt, piercing. The dining room fell silent. Someone knocked over a tray. Someone stood up. Someone started running fast, but the guards didn't stop them. On the contrary, they exchanged sharp glances, ran to the dining room exit, and a few seconds later we heard them closing the door to their block. The lock clicked, then the bolts, then another heavy metal clang. The prisoners began to run to their cells. I began. At the far end of the hall, someone shouted, "Damn it! They're locked in. The guards are locked in. What happened?" And then I heard a voice from the cell across the corridor. Muffled, but very clear. It wants to eat. I turned around. It was the prisoner from the cell across the hall. What? Who wants to? He looked at me with big eyes. It woke up. The prisoners began to rush about. Someone grabbed boards. Someone tore off a piece of metal mesh. Someone grabbed blankets. You hide too, Grandpa shouted at me. Quickly, what should I hide? At the window, the door, everything. It will come for those who are in plain sight. I grabbed a blanket and covered my part of the grate, but it only covered part of. The light from the lamps flickered through the holes, and it seemed as if the darkness was pulsing behind them. A sound came from the hallway, indistinct, distant, not like people's footsteps, more like something being dragged across the floor, something big, something soft. Someone in the back row started crying, and then the crack of metal. I jumped up sharply against the wall. Someone shouted, and no, please, don't take me away. And the scream stopped, not suddenly, no, but slowly, as if someone were squeezing his throat, forcing him to exhale his last breath as if it were passing through a narrow, black slit. I was trembling. Grandpa sat next to me, leaning his back against the wall, and whispered, "Don't move, don't breathe, don't make a sound." I didn't sleep all night. The creature was walking through the corridors. I heard it scraping the walls, moving, something heavy. I heard the bars breaking, and I heard soft smacking sounds, as if it was chewing. When a scream erupted again somewhere in the distance, short, desperate, I felt my legs buckle, and then I understood. In this prison, the horror never goes away. It just waits until it gets hungry. The morning did not come as it usually did in this prison. Usually, the first thing I heard was the rumble of the guards' footsteps, someone arguing, someone laughing, someone pushing a metal door, a sound that was nerve-wracking but
familiar.
and now, silence. Deafening, sticky, so much so that it seemed to press down on my lungs. When the lock rattled, I almost jumped. The door to the prison block opened and the gray morning light spilled in from the corridor. I walked up to the bars and peered into the side passage. Where cell number 156 should have been, there was a gaping hole. No, it wasn't just an open door. The entire grate had been torn out, as if it had been bent by hand, but you can't do that with your hands. The metal was bent inward, pieces of rebar lay on the floor, and the wall around it was splattered with blood as if a live bomb had exploded. I broke out in a cold sweat. Muffled voices came from the hallway. 2 guards stood on the left, closer to the administrative door. I could hear them clearly because no one was shouting in the prison at that moment. "Oh, they took the 156th, one muttered. "How could that be? Damn it. He held out for so long," replied the other. "Almost 2 years. I thought he'd live to see the transfer. If it weren't for the knife, maybe he would have stayed." The fool. My mouth went dry. A knife? Did someone stab the thing that took him away? Something was rotten here, much deeper than just a monster that came once every 6 months. I wanted to shout at them, to ask what was going on, but the guards moved on and soon disappeared behind the door, which slammed shut with a bang. They were pale and trembling. They did not exude authority, only fear. I looked around. There was dead silence in the block. The prisoners sat in their cells. No one moved. No one even breathed loudly. Everyone was staring at one spot, the empty, bloody cell 156. It always comes one at a time. That's what my grandfather said. But this time something went wrong. "Hey!" I heard a quiet hiss from the cell opposite. "Are you new here?" "Come." Closer. I hesitated, but moved closer to the bars. "Do you know why it only took one?" A voice trembled in the darkness. Because it's always like that?" I whispered.
No.
"He stabbed him with a knife. Can you imagine? Right in the stomach." I saw. I glanced once, thinking he wouldn't have time to reach me, but it saw me, and his voice broke, and the man gasped for breath. "Listen, doesn't forgive things like that. Do you understand?" I was silent. That night, it took one because that's how it has to be. But the next, he gulped. "It will be a night of punishment. It wants revenge for that wound. Very bad." He wasn't exaggerating. That night, the prison shook. Screams, rumbling, the sound of doors being torn off, bodies hitting the wall, one after another. 10, 12. Someone prayed, someone called for their mother, someone just tore their hair out so they wouldn't have to think about. By morning, it had quieted down, and now dead. Silence. The prison was in complete disarray, dozens of bars torn. I remembered my grandfather, about his voice, which always rang out in the dining hall, no matter what was happening. About his stories, which were hard to believe, but I believed them, because in this prison, it's impossible not to believe. I rushed over to my neighbor. "Have you seen the old man?" The old man with a bald spot, he always sits in the dining room. My neighbor was silent for a long time. Then he said, "They took him to solitary yesterday." I was shocked. For what? Who knows? They just came and took him away. They said it was an order from above. But after 156 farted, maybe they thought the old man knew something. He's been here the longest. He knows everything. I stood there, unable to believe it. "Grandpa," In solitary confinement? At this time? When it's going around? And what kind of camera is the cell? I exhaled. My neighbor immediately fell silent, as if I had said something forbidden. Are you out of your mind? He hissed. No one goes there. You wouldn't go there, even with 5 guards. It's dark there. Feels better there. I backed off, but the thought of my grandfather wouldn't leave me. No official mourning was announced in the prison, but from the expressions on people's faces, their glances, and the deafening, lingering silence, it was clear that everyone was grieving, not because anyone felt sorry for the dead. Few people here were saints, but everyone understood. The next one could take anyone, and most importantly, what happened tonight was not according to the rules. Always came one at a time. That's how it had been for decades, but not anymore. I sat in my cell, clutching the sides of the blanket. No one made a sound. There wasn't even any snoring. People were afraid to breathe too loudly. Everyone listened to see if it was coming again. And then I broke down. Couldn't just sit and wait. I couldn't just listen to the people around me freeze in fear. I couldn't forget the old man who, on my first day, told me how to survive here, who covered for me in the dining room, who warned me about the rules. And now he sits in the darkness of his cell, alone, without light, without anything, while something roams the prison that fears neither metal, nor guards, nor even the normal laws of nature. I felt my heart beating so hard in my chest that my hands were shaking. Dash, I have to find him. That thought was the only one that wouldn't let go. The prison fell silent, and I could only think of one thing: how to get to solitary confinement. And is Grandpa still alive? Okay, I understood the tone. Slow, atmospheric, psychologically oppressive, and the hero slowly goes mad. The ending is open. The creature arrives. Fear, shadows, knocking, uncertainty. No description of any suicidal actions, just mental breakdown and horror. Now I will write the complete final part, part 5. Long, dense, with a creepy atmosphere. Your events, there will be as much as you want. Approximately 6,000 words of content, i.e., a very large chapter. It seems to me that it was on that very night when everything started to move. From a deadlock, when the prison began to groan as if the bones of the long dead were stirring inside it, that I truly felt for the first time that there was no longer a boundary between reality and the horror that had lived within these walls for decades. The creature that came out every few months woke up angry, hungry, and no one could hold back its hunger anymore. The silence in the cell was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The prisoners did not move. Some did not even breathe, or did so quietly that it seemed as if they were already dead. After last night, everyone knew it would return. I sat there, completely covered with a blanket, as if it could protect me. And suddenly I remembered my grandfather. He was in solitary confinement, alone. If the creature walks the corridors, if it is angry, if today it wants to take not one but all, I felt cold, very cold, like on a winter morning when the ice pierces your lungs. I stood up. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to see if I would hear that sound. Again, a dry shuffling, as if someone huge was touching the walls. But it was quiet, strangely quiet. I cautiously left the cell. The corridor was empty. The light flickered. Once, twice, pause. Once. The smell of dampness mixed with something metallic. The air seemed to sway. I headed toward the punishment cell. I remembered the way because I had already tried to imagine where he was being held. The closer I got, the colder it became. When I reached the corner, I saw something I shouldn't have seen. Two guards sat in front of the cell door. They did not stand. Both had their heads in their hands, leaning against the wall like children, running away from thunder. One was quietly sobbing. The other whispered something indistinct, repeating endlessly. It wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't supposed to. Approached slowly. Hey, what happened? The sobbing stopped. The whispering ceased. They looked at me as if they had seen a talking corpse. You're the one. One of the guards swallowed hard. 137. Where are the keys? I asked. I need to go to solitary confinement. The second guard laughed quietly. It was a dry, stifled laugh. If you want to go, we're done. We're out of the picture. We've had enough. And he pointed to the door. A bunch of keys hung on a hook. When I picked up the keys, they felt colder than they should have been. The metal seemed to absorb the warmth of my fingers. I opened the door. Slowly, very slowly. It felt like the old iron handle was screaming under my weight. The smell hit my nose immediately, sharp, wet, rotten. The smell of blood. I went inside. The light from the hallway barely touched the floor of the cell. It was dark. There, very dark. I had to feel around for the light switch. Click. A dim yellow light flickered under the ceiling, barely hanging on. The old man lay on the floor, in a pool of blood that had already turned dark, almost black. It seemed that it had not just flowed out of him, it had boiled and frozen at the same time. Grandpa! I rushed to him. Grandpa, hang in there. He opened his eyes, with difficulty, as if his eyelids were glued shut. Don't, he said hoarsely. Don't, boy, it's all over. It's all over. Who did this? I almost shouted. It always came, he whispered, but this time, they woke it up. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't supposed to happen. He coughed. Blood touched my hand. Hot. You? Listen. He grabbed my sleeve. You need to know. Wyatt's here. Wyatt's hungry. I leaned closer. His voice became almost inaudible. It's not a ghost. Not a demon. It's the remnants of human suffering. Those who, here, were broken. Not one. All of them. It's hatred that has become flesh. Do you understand? I nodded. It doesn't come for those who are guilty, he whispered. It comes for those who smell of fear and truth. His eyes rolled back. Grandpa, but he was no longer breathing. The light above us flickered, and from the dark corridor behind the door of the punishment cell, something quiet, almost imperceptible, scratched the wall. I froze. I ran out of the punishment cell. The guards were gone. They had fled. They didn't even hear me slam the door. I rushed back to my block, hearing something slowly and methodically scratching. The concrete behind me in the corridor. Not hard, not in a hurry, as if it knew that I wouldn't escape anyway. When I rushed into my block, someone below shouted, "Hey, you, number 137. I peeked through the bars. It was a young guard, one who hadn't yet been driven mad by fear. "You're free," he shouted. "The documents just arrived. You're not guilty. You can go." "What?" I gasped. "Run, if you can. I don't know if it's already." He fell silent, looking around. "Just let's go." He turned the key, opened the door, grabbed my hand, and literally dragged me down the hallway. Faster, faster. he repeated, looking back. The bodies were past, some still breathing, some were not. The lights went out and came back on again. When we reached the main exit, the guard pushed me out sharply. Run! And then he closed the door from the inside. I could still see him through the window as he jumped back, as if something was moving deep in the hallway. Then the door fell, silent. I walked all night. I don't remember how. No cars, no people, just darkness and cold. When I got home, it was dawn, cold, pale. I lay down on the bed and tried not to think, but it didn't work. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard scratch, 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 as if someone was touching the walls of my consciousness. On the first night, I heard knock. I shuddered. Knock. Louder now. I went to the window. No one. Only darkness. When I returned to bed, I heard a third knock, this time on the door. Who's there? I whispered. Silence was the only answer. Then scratching. Not on the door. On the floor. Under the window. Just like in a prison corridor. Didn't sleep. All night. Suddenly, the pipes in the kitchen started humming. The water turned on by itself. Cold water. I turned it off. A minute later, it turned on again, and I heard 137. The voice was barely audible, hoarse, distant, as if it was coming not from the pipe, but from the depths of the earth. I dropped the mug, shattered into pieces. I lay there staring at the ceiling. It was quiet. It was so quiet that I could hear my own pulse in my temples. Then a shadow, small at first, as if a mouse had run by. Then a long one, uneven, a shadow stretching along the wall, touching my feet. Didn't move. The shadow slid higher to the door and stopped. I exhaled, barely audible. The shadow disappeared. That night, I heard something slowly open the door to the hallway. The doorknob turned by itself. The room grew colder. I covered myself with a blanket, just like in the cell. Someone entered the room. Not footsteps, quiet rustling sounds, as if a heavy body was sliding across the floor. My heart was beating so hard that I thought it would jump out of my chest. I didn't breathe. The air seemed to thicken. Then I heard a familiar breath. Slow, deep. It was as if someone was standing over my bed. Why? Someone whispered, "Why are you alive?" 137. And I realized it wasn't the guard's voice. It wasn't my grandfather's voice, and not a human voice at all. In the morning, I sat by the window and trembled. I couldn't concentrate. The walls were breathing. The floor whispered. The curtains swayed, even though the windows were closed. I no longer knew if it was a dream or reality. And when the sun disappeared behind the horizon, silence fell upon me. Real, dead. Such silence can only be found in a grave. I understood. It had come. And this time, for me,
Twilight
crept into the room. The street lights flickered and went out. I heard the first knock, like thump. Then a second knock on the door, on the window, at the same time. Then something slowly ran a claw across the wood, as if testing the strength of the board. I stood in the middle of the room. The air trembled. A shadow grew on the wall, long.
Impossible.
It had no shape, only the outlines of hatred and hunger. It slowly turned its head toward me, and at that moment I realized The prison had not let me go. IT hadn't let me go because my grandfather had told the truth. It comes for those who smell of fear and truth. The darkness in front of me stirred. The knocking grew louder. Knock, knock, knock. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I no longer knew whether I was standing in my room or back in that prison. The walls around me were breathing. A shadow rose, and someone's whisper, familiar and strange at the same time, touched my ear. You were supposed to die there. 137 something. Whispered, I will find everyone who was in the prison that night. The light went out, and darkness closed in. 3 days after the neighbors stopped seeing light in his windows, someone finally called the police. First, no one panicked. The neighbor could have just gone away. But the people in the building talked about strange things. Something walked the stairs at night. Someone quietly tried the doors from the inside, and the window glass in the hero's apartment was always covered with marks that looked like handprints or something else. The police arrived during the day. The building was quiet, the air frozen, as if it were afraid to move. The hero's apartment felt lifeless even before they opened the door. The lock wasn't broken. The door gave way easily, almost silently, as if not wanting to disturb what was left inside. They went in, and almost immediately realized that something was wrong. The rooms were messy, but not in the way they are after a break-in or robbery. Everything looked abandoned. An overturned chair lay on the floor, as if someone had been sitting on it for a very long time, until they fell with it. On the wall, just below the ceiling, there was a dark mark that resembled a sweeping brushstroke, but it wasn't paint. There was a musty smell in the air, as if no one had breathed in the apartment. For a long time, what they found in the bedroom took their breath away. In the middle of the room, on the floor, lay something that resembled a body, in shape, but it was difficult to call it human. It was dry, as if burned from the inside, with no visible wounds, no blood, no struggle. It was as if something had simply taken its life, carefully, thoroughly, slowly. "My God," whispered one of the officers and stepped back. The other leaned closer, as close as his courage would allow. His face, or rather what was left of it, was frozen in an expression that was neither suffering nor pain. It was an expression of pure, genuine horror, the kind that could not have been caused by a person or circumstance. Only something that should not exist could make someone look like that. The documents on the table, the belongings, the photo, the notebook on the nightstand, everything confirmed that it was him, the one who had been released from prison a few days ago, the one who had said to his neighbor through the door, "I can't take it anymore. It won't let me go." Death had occurred at least a day ago, and although the experts later rewrote the reports 3 times, none of them could indicate the cause. Next to condition of the body, they wrote only exhaustion, stress, unknown factors, and under this line, a barely noticeable addition, eyes, as if they had seen something last. The police searched the apartment. For a long time, they questioned the neighbors. We listened to their frightened stories about nighttime footsteps and knocking on windows, which continued even after the hero, according to their assumptions, was already dead. Finally, the apartment was sealed. The doors closed. The hallway became quiet. A few hours later, one of the officers, passing by, swore that he heard a quiet, very quiet sound coming from behind the sealed door, the vibration of glass. It sounded like someone tapping lightly on the window from the inside, but when he turned his head, the corridor was empty. The windows were motionless. Silence breathed again on its own, just as slow, just as cold, as if waiting